Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Natasha Ryan? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Natasha Ann Ryan was born on May 11, 1984, and lived in Rockhampton, Queensland, Australia. This is about 400 miles north of Brisbane. When she was young, Natasha had behavioral problems. She ran away several times, regularly fought with her mother, Jenny, and was suspended from school. At some point, her parents divorced. When Natasha was 14 years old, she had a 21-year-old boyfriend named Scott Black. He worked as a milkman. Sometime around July 1998, Natasha and Scott ran off together. When questioned by the police, Scott denied knowing where Natasha was. 2 days after this, Natasha was found. Later, Scott pleaded guilty to willful obstruction of police. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On August 31, 1998, Natasha Ryan was reported missing. This was only about a month after she had disappeared and was found again. She was last seen outside a Rockhampton movie theater, smoking a cigarette and talking to an older man. Witnesses said they heard the sound of car tires screeching, and Natasha was gone. The police searched for Natasha without success and eventually came to believe that she had been murdered. 8 months after Natasha's disappearance, a 9-year-old girl named Kira Steinhardt was kidnapped in broad daylight as she walked home from school. The investigation led the police to a man named Leonard John Fraser. Kira's blood was found in his car, as well as the blood of another person. During an interview with the police, Leonard directed them to a location just outside of town in the bushland where they found the body of Kira. This solved one crime, but there were other missing women, including Natasha. The police believed that Leonard was a serial killer and Natasha was one of his victims. Leonard was convicted for murdering Kira, but wouldn't reveal details about other victims until he was offered a deal. He desperately wanted to be moved into protective custody because other prisoners were eager to terminate his existence. In exchange for being moved into a murder-free environment, Leonard confessed to killing 4 other victims, including Natasha Ryan. In April 2003, during Leonard's trial for the murders he confessed to, the police received an anonymous letter indicating that Natasha Ryan was alive and well. It also provided a phone number for a house in the Rockhampton suburb of Frenchville. This house was rented by Scott Black. On April 10, the police raided the house and found Natasha hiding in a small closet, which was also referred to as a cupboard. She told the police that she left home of her own volition in 1998 to be with her boyfriend Scott. Finding Natasha alive was devastating to the Crown's case against Leonard Fraser. The Crown, of course, still had Leonard's confession, but a key part of any murder case is having a dead victim. Some would argue that the murder part is the most important part of that type of case. Unless Natasha had risen from the dead, the Crown was going to lose. On April 11, 2003, the Crown informed the court that Natasha was alive. Leonard's defense did not ask for a mistrial, and the trial continued. On April 30 of that same year, Natasha testified at her own murder trial and said that she had never met Leonard. If she had never met him, then how would he have killed her? Furthermore, if she was talking on the stand, how could she be dead? The defense had a lot to work with here. Having a living murder victim represents a pretty good defense against a murder charge. Leonard was not convicted of Natasha's murder, but he was convicted of the other 3 murders. His sentence was life in prison. In 2005, Natasha's boyfriend Scott Black pleaded guilty to perjury for stating that he did not know where Natasha was. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but 2 years were suspended. In 2006, Natasha was convicted of causing a false police investigation. She received a $1,000 fine. On January 1, 2007, Leonard Fraser died in prison from cardiac problems. In 2008, Natasha and Scott married. They went on to have 4 children. As far as her career, Natasha became a radiology nurse. 16 years later, on June 2, 2024, Scott Black contacted the police and told them that Natasha had disappeared overnight. After a few hours, they found 40-year-old Natasha Ryan's dead body at a golf course in Rockhampton. The police said that her death was not suspicious. It is reasonable to believe that she brought an end to her own life. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. After Natasha was found, she filled in some of the blanks about what happened to her during her disappearance. There are many reasons to doubt Natasha's credibility, and she had a very low level of insight. But here's what she said. Natasha was upset because her parents divorced and she did not want to be in school anymore. After an argument with the teacher, she decided that she had enough. She was going to run away with her boyfriend. Scott picked her up at the movie theater. There was never a kidnapping. For a while, Natasha and Scott lived in a residence in Yeppoon, Queensland. This small town is about a half hour from Rockhampton. Sometime in late 2002, they moved back to Rockhampton after Scott was transferred there by his employer. They lived just a few minutes away from Natasha's mother, Jenny. The couple went to great lengths to keep Natasha from being spotted. During her time living with Scott, Natasha had only gone outside 6 times. Even then, she only went out at night. For example, she visited a beach at midnight. Heavy curtains were over the windows, and they were kept closed all the time. Natasha kept busy by sewing and trying to learn German. The media kept calling Natasha the girl in the cupboard, implying that she spent a lot of time in the place where the police found her hiding, almost like she was a tiny house movement extremist. Natasha said she really didn't live in the cupboard. Rather, she only climbed in there when Scott had visitors at the house. Yoga positions helped her to stay more comfortable when she was in the cupboard. Item number 2. Natasha contemplated contacting her mother several times during the disappearance. Reuniting would have been ideal, but the lie had become too big. Natasha was too fearful to follow through, believing that she would go to prison or some other bad place. Ironically, after being caught, Natasha believed that prison is exactly where she belonged. She thought that she deserved to be there for all the trouble she had caused. On this point, many people agreed with Natasha. They were angry because she profited from her deception while costing taxpayers about $400,000. Natasha earned about $120,000 for interviews and signed a deal with Woman's Day magazine to buy her wedding photos for $200,000. It is true that Natasha made money from her disappearance, but it's worth noting that the government would have incurred a lot of the search-related expenses, even without the disappearance, because they were looking for other victims as well. Item number 3. Despite being isolated from the world, Natasha was aware that Leonard Fraser had been charged in connection with murdering her. Natasha was also aware that she was alive. Therefore, she could not be a murder victim. She refused to come forward on her own because she believed Leonard's prosecution was a scam to expose her location. Like she would see this and think, I need to come out into the open, and then she would get caught. Some have argued this response indicated that Natasha was self-centered. Everything was about her. Item number 4. The police bear some responsibility for the failure to locate Natasha. She had run away with Scott a month before she disappeared, and Scott lied about it. I wonder why it didn't occur to the police that maybe she ran away with Scott a second time, which is exactly what happened. The investigation was so focused on homicide, it never even occurred to anyone that Natasha was simply with Scott. Item number 5. During an interview featuring Natasha and her mother, some people were highly critical of her mother's attitude. Jenny appeared to blame Natasha for leaving, even though there were a number of extenuating circumstances. For example, Natasha was clearly suffering from mental health symptoms. She was only 14 years old when she disappeared, and she went to live with a boyfriend who was 7 years older than her. Despite Natasha's claims about acting on her own volition, it is possible that she was manipulated. A little bit of compassion could have gone a long way in terms of understanding her motivation. One could argue that Natasha was a victim more so. than a perpetrator. Item number 6, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Natasha probably suffered from several mental health symptoms, including depression and mood instability. She viewed life at home as unacceptable and desperately wanted to be with her boyfriend Scott. The police should have been able to find Natasha quickly, but they became fixated on the idea that she was murdered because other women had gone missing as well. This failure to properly investigate allowed Natasha and Scott to live together undetected. Natasha wanted to return home, but the intensity of her shame was so pronounced that she never came forward. She was happy to be with Scott and stay inside for the rest of her life. Natasha didn't have any type of plan to work, to get an education, or to do anything involving contact with other people outside of Scott. She was living a nightmare, but convinced herself she was having the best time ever. When Natasha was found alive, she accepted full responsibility for the decision to disappear. Instead of leading to feelings of compassion, this caused people to be angry with Natasha. All the blame was on her. Somehow, Scott's behavior became largely overlooked. He only served a year in prison, and this penalty had nothing to do with the fact that Natasha was 14 when she went to live with him. In Queensland, the age of consent is 16, and there is no Romeo and Juliet law. It's not clear why the government never pursued this. Maybe they believed that no sex occurred when Natasha was under 16. After being discovered, whatever mental health symptoms that Natasha had faced were now amplified by a sense of shame. Her attempt to put together a normal life appeared to be successful, but eventually Natasha could no longer deal with her demons. Now moving to my final thoughts. The primary theme of this case is how Natasha did not find much in the way of compassion after pulling her 4.5-year disappearance stunt. I don't know if Natasha is a victim or not, but it is difficult to overlook that she was 14 when she left and lived with someone who was 7 years older. This should have been the primary focus rather than this idea that Natasha was bad or evil. This wasn't a story about a master manipulator. Rather, it was a story of someone who ran away and stayed in her boyfriend's house. Natasha imposed self-confinement, believing she could find freedom, lived in darkness, hoping to see the light, and kept her skeletons in the closet by making a closet her home. Those are my thoughts in the case of Natasha Ryan. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They consistently generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.